correctly with the correct amount.
D20 Radio, where gamers roll.
www.d20radio.com.
Welcome to Me and Steve Talk RPGs, a podcast where me and my friend Steve try and help you get the most out of your role-playing game experience.
Welcome back to Me and Steve Talk RPGs. I'm here with my friend Steve.
Hello, Steve.
Oh, hello, Steve. And we have a very important guest this week. But before we get into that, let's talk about the Wondrous Atlas.
Yes, the Wondrous Atlas of Creation's Destiny, which may well be the longest podcast title on the D20 Radio Network. But that's okay, because it's a really cool podcast.
It is a really cool podcast.
And Aramithius and Rials host it. They are a couple of UK-based individuals. They're very much fun to talk to. We had them on for an episode a little while back. But Wondrous Atlas is a podcast all about Exalted. And I believe, I forget, they kind of span all the editions and talk about the differences between them. And what they typically do is they pick something and do a deep dive on it. And usually they'll do their episodes kind of like in pairs, where one will be kind of a deep dive on the lore of it, and then the other half will be a dive on how you can use it in your game, depending on which edition you're playing, etc.
Yeah, really helpful tools over there for that system in that game, which is really cool. I'm still interested in playing some Exalted, just slowly.
Yes.
All right. Well, with that, let's go ahead and get into our guest. We want to welcome back JT Dimino.
Yes.
Hey, how you doing, Steve?
Not so bad. How about you?
Hey, can't complain. Yeah. If you keep calling me an important guest, I think I'm gonna have to come on more often.
Well, because you're like the PR guy for the network, you're sort of important, at least.
Fair. All right.
At least in our eyes.
Yeah. By the way, it was great getting to meet both of you at Gamer Nation Con this year. That was pretty awesome.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm excited to go back to that next year and get everything in order.
Myself.
Have to. I haven't missed a year since I went. I think it was number 5 was my first one.
Yeah, I apologize because when you and I got to play together, I believe it was Sunday morning, by which point I was apparently not nearly as awake as I thought I was.
Oh, no, you were great. Actually, that game on Sunday morning, which was Monster of the Week for our listeners at home, that was probably like some of the most fun I've ever had at the Gamer Nation Con. Just we had a great group, and everyone really fed well off of each other. Lots of back and forth role playing and laughs. So, I mean, what more could you ask for?
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. I had a pretty fantastic game about midday Saturday that I'm pretty sure anybody that those players let talk to them long enough heard about that game.
Was that when you played Ghostbusters?
No, that was when I played It Wasn't Us Meddling Kids.
Okay. I couldn't remember what you played when.
And Terry and all those people were like, this was amazing.
Yes.
But speaking of amazing things, you wanted to come on and talk about sort of player knowledge versus character knowledge and some things around metagaming, essentially.
Yeah, basically, I just had been giving it a lot of thought recently, and so I sort of just pitched the idea to Steve, and thought it would be a good idea for an episode, and I volunteered myself onto the show. So,
well, I mean, you're fun to talk with, you're fun to hang out with, so why not?
Yeah, thank you for that.
Oh, not a problem.
Yeah. But so player knowledge versus character knowledge, and kind of challenging players versus challenging the characters, sort of two sides of the same coin. And, obviously those are sort of two different things when we're talking about the player versus the character, although, some people can get really into it and it can be hard to tell the difference at times. But
yeah. I've been known to play characters that are a little bit like me on occasion.
Hey, I mean, I'm not complaining either, but
I've been known to play characters that are, I don't know, a little too close to home quite as well.
Hey, man, if you can embody your character, more power to you. That's sort of like role playing, right? You're supposed to be getting into the role. So if you can, whatever works.
Yeah, no, but I think, you do bring up interesting point, and, there's also some points around that into, how you GM and what things you include as a GM. If you're GMing the game, and not the player. Because as the GM, when you're running NPCs, of course, you have the fiat of you can make up how the character you're portraying knew the thing. And
Yeah.
because you're the GM, well, yeah, it works.
Oh yeah, definitely.
But
Eh,
go ahead.
Oh no.
Um, okay. So yeah, but there are elements to games, and especially, some of what a lot of people consider to be some of the classic elements of specifically like dungeon crawl RPGs are in some ways often actually more aimed at the players than the characters. And I don't know that that's a bad thing, but I think it's something you need to be aware of as a game master.
Oh yeah, for sure. That was actually something I was going to bring up if you didn't, was that kind of when you talk about, like the origins of role-playing games and Dungeons and Dragons in particular, I'd say, they came from the war games, which basically was, strategy, and, you had to sort of think, and, as the player, you're doing all of this maneuvering and, trying to come up with plans and how are you going to attack and defend, all this other stuff. And so obviously, role playing sort of was born out of that, and you can definitely see that influence from like the early role playing games like that. And you can definitely see that they were aiming more for the player. Although obviously, it being a role playing game, it was interesting because you still have to have sort of that duality there of you're going to challenge the player, but you still have to have something going on with the character. But that it wasn't as distinctive a line, and there wasn't as much emphasis on, oh, what is my character's personality, or things like that. And it's a lot more of sort of like challenging the player to look for traps and figure out like how they would approach that situation. And so definitely has evolved over the years. And I'd say that I think a lot of mainstream games these days incorporate ways to allow you to focus more on the characters and mechanics specifically for what the characters are doing or know versus what the player might know.
True, true. Yeah, and I mean, it varies so much by the system too, right? But I think it even more is really very subjective to your play group, and how you as a collective choose to kind of view things, right? Like, this kind of to me ties in too to the conversation we've had with various people about horror games and how in horror games, very often in character, you're making what from a third person perspective are very suboptimal decisions. But in the context of the game, it feels like either narratively or at least from a perspective of amusing ourselves as the participants in the game, the appropriate thing to do, as opposed to the, oh, I want to keep my character alive thing to do.
Yeah, yeah, that you actually brought up some really great points. And so first off, I definitely agree with you about the subjectivity of it. And I am a big proponent of the idea that what's the right way to play is basically whatever is the most fun for the group. And obviously, every group is going to have different ideas of what's the best way to do things, or like what do we want to focus on. And obviously it also can vary by the game or system. But if you have a group of players who are really into that sort of like getting into their character and trying to do and talk like the character, and make sure that there isn't sort of as much of a distinction, then you're probably going to want to focus more on challenging the characters, because the goal is to sort of embody the characters and make decisions based on how your characters think, and not necessarily like what you think is the best decision. Like you were saying with horror, definitely a big part of that genre kind of is people doing stupid things, kind of, like, oh, why are you going into the basement alone? When you heard the weird noise, that seems like a really dumb thing to do in reality. But, if you're trying to emulate that genre, then that's a great way to do it, is to, sort of think about how would this work in like a horror story or film or whatever.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think in some cases, not to jump way ahead, because I don't know all the points that you've got in mind, but there is a stigma at times about people will only do what operate under the assumption of what your character would know. Well, yes, but I think that brings up the question of, are we playing the games as a participant or as an audience member with a vote? Does that make any sense?
Yeah, for sure.
And by that, if anyone out there is looking at their phone or whatever you listen on and going, what the hell does he mean? What I mean is, are we playing the game solely from the viewpoint of the character that you're portraying, or are you playing the game and viewing it as a story that you happen to have a significant potential impact on by the choices you make in the elements that you have control on? Are you playing as your character, Chucky the Barbarian, or are you, one of a community directing the movie that Chucky the Barbarian happens to be in? And I don't know that either one is right, wrong, or however, just, it is a thought to have around that.
Yeah, and it's a very good thought, and I really like that you brought that up. And I think we'll probably end up going back to this a lot as we're talking, but I really think that it's going to be up to sort of like the group and what everyone feels comfortable with, and also what I was thinking of when you were talking about that is how important setting expectations is at the beginning of a campaign.
Mm-hmm.
And if you have players who, for example, maybe feel really uncomfortable with the role playing, or they really have a hard time sort of getting into the heads of their characters specifically, but they enjoy playing it, just because it's fun and it allows them the opportunity to sort of have solve puzzles, or strategize to fight the enemies and stuff like that, then maybe having that separation there and having some challenge to the player rather than the character might be more appropriate. I definitely have had players in my games that felt really uncomfortable, like role playing or like talking like their character would talk. And so, like, for example, with like social situations, depending on your group, some groups might want to actually have a player make the argument or speech that their character is supposed to be making, and base, sort of like the success or difficulty based off of like what points that person is making. But for other people, they may not feel comfortable with that or be the best talker in real life. And so that's where mechanics, like in a lot of modern editions of games, where you can have like social checks and things like that, can really come in handy. And I think that there's room for both of those, and it really just depends on your particular group and the game you're playing, and what everyone feels most comfortable with.
Yeah.
Well, I was going to say, one thing that I found that sort of helps with that trepidation is people are intimidated by trying to do voices. And one thing that I've really tried to break down as far as a barrier in my games is you don't have to do a voice for your character, right? Like, if your character talks in your voice, that's okay. Nobody at the table is going to judge you because you're not like, oh, you didn't affix a fake British accent. That's not a problem. It's fine. And I've really worked with my players, because I've run into that in the past where people are like, oh, but I can't do a voice. It's like, oh, you don't have to. Don't do a voice. Talk to me like you would normally. tell me what your character says, and everybody at the table can make up their own, if they sound like you, they sound like you. If they don't, and you want them to sound like this, but you can't keep that voice up, that's fine. Not everyone's a professional voice actor. I mean, that's just all there is to it. That's one thing that I found that helps break down some of those barriers, is to get people comfortable with just role play. Just, you don't have to be extra. Nobody's recording this. You know what I mean? Like,
Well, even if
unless
they
you're
are
doing actual play, but...
even then, for our actual plays, it's us screwing around. So
yeah, I mean, I can't keep the accent for my own character straight, much less whether anyone else is.
The only way I could do, and the only way I've effectively done an accent for a game, is when I affect my local hick accent. You know the local hick accent, Steve.
Yeah.
I affect an accent that is effectively my cousin. And
I think the only one I've ever kept straight was my smart ass French guy. Yeah.
And even then you dropped in and out of it. I mean,
yeah.
But it's, I think that's one thing. And then here's a trick I love doing. I love coming up with a puzzle in game and then showing up at the table with, let's say, a Rubik's Cube or a metal puzzle, and handing it to my players and going, this is what you find.
Man, that's awesome. And
Yeah.
I would definitely like that type of thing, because I as a player, I do enjoy puzzles and trying to think, figure things out myself. And I'm right with you on the accents, by the way, especially if I'm GMing. I'll start out usually a session and I'll be doing different voices, and eventually it's just, as more and more characters come into play, I just can't do it anymore. And I end up just sort of naturally falling back into my own voice a lot of times, and just saying, like, to hell with it. This is more trouble than it's worth. But
yeah, I've gotten like 3 voices for 3 main characters that I can do, and that's about it. I'm not going to do them here because they're not good, but like I said, I have 3 voices for like 3 main characters. That's all I can do as a GM. Everybody else gets Steve voice.
that'll be bonus content for the episode.
Yeah. But yeah, the puzzle thing. I don't know what I had that like realization a couple years ago of like, well, why don't I? Because I love those. They're the Hanma metal puzzles, like fiddly, $10, $20 sometimes, and because I love to fidget with things, and I was like, these would be great to set at a table and then describe in game, and then just be like, figure it out, and you can see who's the puzzle solvers and who aren't, and letting them just hash it out and be like, well, but what if does it turn that way? No, it doesn't turn. Oh, one of the tricks I like to do is I'll take the player that says that they're not good with puzzles and stick them in a room with a puzzle, but within earshot of the other players. So the other players have to narrate them through solving this puzzle, because there's usually, not always, one person in that group that's really good in real life at puzzles.
Yeah,
Okay.
I mean, that's definitely one way to do it, for sure.
That is, it's a different way to do it, but I kind of like, and I think, just going back to one of the points we made earlier, though, puzzles are very much a challenge for the player as opposed to the character in the end.
In the end, yes, but narratively, you can still make them a challenge for the character.
Yeah.
You could still pick the character. Like, I pick on my character. My player characters get picked on. It's just a consequence of playing at my game. And I usually pick on the, like, quote unquote low intelligence characters to do puzzles, because I know the player's not low intelligence, so I don't have to, I'm not being rude or anything like that, but I know that their character is, and I know that that can cause some, what have I called it in the past? Mental splinters, making people try to think about how their less experienced character might solve a puzzle that they themselves would have no issues with.
Yeah, and I think that is totally a cool way to do things, with the qualifier that obviously your group pretty well when you're doing this, so like you probably know that they're comfortable being put in those situations.
Right. Yeah, that's not a do that at a con game, because I think people would be like, whoa.
Yeah, I think that, like you said, I think you do need to very much, that has to be I'm familiar with this table technique.
Yeah, that's a very, I know you guys, or I know you folks, and I know what this is gonna go like.
I mean, I generally probably wouldn't do that with a con game just because I think it would make things a little bit too complicated and there are a lot of potentials for issues or other things. But if you wanted to do it with a con game, I think it would be possible. You would just have to sort of set the expectations at the beginning and make sure, like, hey, everybody, I had an idea that I wanted to do like an actual puzzle as part of this one shot or something like that. Is everyone cool with actually trying to solve this puzzle in real life? And as long as everyone's cool with giving that a try, then why not?
Well, and then there's games that's their whole premise, like Dread. Dread is a game based around playing Jenga, or a Jenga tower, I should say. And when the Jenga tower
Right.
falls, player characters go, and that's the entire point of that game. Is it's a mixture of the dexterity puzzle that is Jenga plus a horror RPG, which makes for a really tense, fun game, but it is still a meta puzzle, essentially.
Oh yeah, yeah. I actually haven't gotten to play Dread in person, but I definitely know of Dread, and man, I've been trying to get it on the table. And I just haven't found the opportunity. But Halloween is coming up, in the next month or so. So actually, maybe that'll be something I can plan for my local group.
I had a buddy that was hounding me. And when I say hounding me, I mean like it was almost every day. It was to a point where I was like, dude, he was like, you got to run Dread for me. You got to run Dread. You got to run Dread. I'm like, fine. It's your birthday. I'll be nice. I'll run Dread. And we had a great time. I knew we were going to. It was just like one of those things where it was like, come on. So yeah, I ran it. It's great. It's fantastic. But yeah, at the end of the day, it's playing Jenga while also role playing.
Yeah, that can be a lot of fun. And not to circle back too much, but I was thinking about what you were saying earlier with making your character or your players comfortable, just like speaking in their own voice potentially. And yeah, I'm with you on that for sure. And I've definitely tried to get my players to understand, like, hey, I'm not going to pressure you. You can play your character however you want. You can do voices, you could not do voices. You can say what your characters are literally saying, or you can, give me a summary of what they're saying, which I think is also a good alternative too for players who might not be comfortable. Like, for example, if they're giving a speech or trying to convince someone of something, even if they can't say exactly what they are telling another character, sort of one thing removed from that could be like, okay, like I, point out how, this thing is in their best interest and they could make a lot of money if they go along with it, or things like that. And so you're not literally speaking as your character, but you can at least sort of get into the headspace of your character and be like, what would my character say, without having to actually act it out and be a good talker.
Yeah, and I even accept, like, I've told players before, hey, look, if you just want to give me a basic summary of what you're trying to say, we can figure out some way that this works out amicably. You know what I mean? Like, some people have a hard time expressing major thoughts or long speeches or anything like that, and I've just been like, okay, I get that. You don't want to give a long-winded speech. Give me the Cliff's Notes version of it, and we will be kosher with that.
Right. And this gets into, I think, one of the kind of the classic arguments about this, right? Because you'll have the player who, because the player, can very effectively, persuade whatever, they want to get up and give this, big, long winded whatever, and they don't have the stats to back it up. Where you'll also have the player who can't do that, as far as a player, but they like, well, I got the stats, I just want to roll for it. And I think this gets to a question too of, as much as you want to reward people for very good role play, you have to be careful doing that you don't do it in a way which effectively penalizes someone who just doesn't have the ability to role play the things that their character is good at.
Yeah, definitely. And I definitely agree with you there, Steve. And I think that really just sort of emphasizes the importance of the group that you're playing with, and also potentially the game or system that you're playing, because some games will sort of have, okay, you've got your charisma check or something like that, or like a knowledge check of some sort to see whether or not your character would know this thing, even if you as a player would have no idea potentially. Um, but if and even in those systems where they have those, I do know of people, and I've done it myself too for groups that were into it. I, instead of having them roll the check, I will just say like, hey, if you can give me like a good argument for why you know why a character should do this, or like if you can give like try to convince me as the NPC why I should let you pass or whatever, then no need to roll. I'll just let you go because if it makes sense to them, then why not?
See, I do that kind of reverse though. I go to my players and say, you have the opportunity here to convince them, or if you choose to roll, you can roll. And just let them pick whether they want to roll dice or not.
Oh yeah, I think that's great.
I'm a little weird in that sense because I like to just, if you feel like you can't sufficiently express in words why you should get this, but you feel your character can, roll dice and you're good to go.
Oh yeah, yeah. I don't think you're necessarily weird. I think that's a good way of doing it because it will accommodate sort of players that prefer one way or the other. Where it
Well,
could get kind of dicey. Oh, sorry.
no, go ahead.
I was just gonna say where it could get kind of dicey, I imagine, though, is when you start getting players getting salty or disagreeing over like, oh, well, they can convince them, and succeed, but I'm not a good talker in real life, and then my character, might also not be the best at convincing, so I feel like I'm at a disadvantage, and then also like if you can convince them, but if in reality your character isn't great at talking, then maybe that isn't the most realistic thing. So, those are things you have to consider and balance too.
And that's again why I go with the, you have the opportunity to do it one way or another. And anytime that there's anytime that there's any sort of disagreement like that comes up, I usually go to the party and go, maybe there's somebody else that can help you convince this person. Not every conversation has to be a one-sided conversation, right? Like it doesn't have to always be between two people.
Yeah, no, actually, that's really cool because that's encouraging interaction between the players.
Right.
Yeah, and also you saying that reminded me of like there a lot of times in games are mechanics for like aiding or helping another person, and sometimes there's like mechanics behind that and things like that. But even if you wanted to do it sort of like just as almost like in a role playing sense, like hey you feed them lines or whatever, it can actually work out really well, and you can sort of have both elements there kind of in the game.
Right, right. Yeah, even if there isn't rules for aiding or assisting in that way, I usually come up with something on the fly and be like, "Hey, let's do this." You two are having a conversation with that guy. It's 2-on-1. I'll reduce the check and, give you some sort of bonus because you're both trying to convince somebody. And statistically, more than one person saying the same thing is more likely to make somebody believe you in what you're saying.
Now, here's a question for you since we've been talking about sort of this idea of letting the players choose whether they want to try to convince someone, for example, or roll the dice to see if their character can do it. So, what do you do then when there may be a conflict between, for example, how good a player is at talking, and how good their character is at talking? Like, would you force them to roll dice then so that it's more like what their character would be capable of, or do you let them go for it and tell them like, hey, just like keep in mind that your character is not as good of a talker as you?
Yes. So I don't like to force dice rolls. I very much like to let things happen organically. And so if I don't have to make you roll dice, I won't. However, if you're playing the generic dumb bard or the dumb barbarian, right? And you're trying to espouse deep philosophical thought that has not been that is not character knowledge but player knowledge, I'm going to be like, okay, but your character doesn't know this, so maybe roll dice. Or how did you learn? The question then becomes, how do you know this, right? So I always go and ask the players, if it's something that I don't believe their character would know, I go to them and go, how do you know this? And if they give me some, and it could be made up, I don't care. It doesn't have to be prefabulated. But if you come up with, oh, well, when my character was 5 years old, they learned this thing from this person that they really respected. Okay, you gave me a background reason on why you know this, so you know it.
Well, it just occurred to me another way you could handle that is let them give their whatever, or be their speech, be it long and verbose or very,
Short, sweet, and to the point.
right. Okay. Now have them roll. And then based on that, it's not how well they did explaining it, it's how the person they're trying to convince perceived it. So
I've done that as well. I've done, especially in D&D, I'll do just sort of a perception check, or a what is the term for
persuasion?
what's the term to tell if somebody's lying to you in D&D now?
I'm blanking too.
I'm sure the audience is yelling at us. You know the one.
Almost certainly.
That check that you do to tell if somebody's lying to you in D&D. That's the yep, nope, it's gone.
But effectively, does the long verbose whatever set off the individual? They roll poorly because they have crappy stats, in all honesty, more than the actual roll itself.
Insight check.
Yeah, there you
is
go.
the term.
Yeah, there we go.
But does the person they're trying to persuade perceive them as effectively just trying to butter them up and feed them a load of BS? Or if you know what I'm saying? Like, you could also play it that way.
It's all situational, right?
Right. Oh no, and I'm just presenting a so to speak, another potential tool.
Yeah, no, that's a lot of fun too, to throw that monkey wrench in when you have players that are talking their way through everything, and then just to be like, no, you're lying. And you just have let's say they're talking to someone, maybe they are telling the truth, maybe they are being perfectly honest,
Exactly.
but they're just talking to somebody who just doesn't believe them. And that's life, man. I have talked to so many people that are like, no, that's not how that is. And then you like bring up proof and they're like, oh, like,
yeah.
I have a lot of family that is like, and it's like, well, no. So I know exactly that pain. And that is translating, that's translating some real world stuff into game stuff that is, you might hit a nerve. I don't think you're going to hit a nerve hard enough that it's a safety breach, but just be aware of that. But yeah, I love that. I love doing that, where it's just like, no, I don't believe you. And then the players scramble. Then they're like, how do I make him believe me? I don't know.
Yeah, just to build on that, I was actually thinking, when Steve was talking about it, you can also effectively use the content of what the character is supposedly saying to then influence, depending on the system, obviously, and the way things work, like a difficulty, or giving a bonus or penalty based off of their words or their approach. If someone is more likely to think you're lying, then going at it one way might be more effective than going at it a different way. And then you can sort of use both things, the role and what they're trying to say, and put it together.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I will. Well, I'm not a prefixed difficulty person in general, so I oftentimes going into sessions, I have no clue what rolls are going to be made, what checks are going to be made, what those difficulties are, what the difficulty numbers would be, or penalties or any of that. So yeah, that's something I just absolutely roll right into.
Well, to take the lid off the pot for a second, I sometimes will ask for rolls in situations like that, and I have no freaking target number whatsoever in mind.
No,
I'm looking to
99%
see
of the time. No.
relatively what number comes up on the die. Did they roll well or did they not roll well? That's what I'm looking for.
I have rolled dice so many times to be like, okay, what's your difficulty number? I sit and fidget. I sit and fidget at the table. So it's not uncommon for me to just be sitting and like bouncing in dice. Well, it takes nothing to bounce a die off the table and use it as an actual roll. So I'll just bounce it off the table and be like, okay, that's the difficulty number.
I mean, as long as you're not being like too arbitrary, you know.
No. It's not a. It's never a penalizing thing. It's always like, okay, I'm gonna set a difficulty number. I don't know. I think it's gonna be moderately difficult. We'll roll the die. If it's too high, I'm gonna roll it again. Like that's all it is to it. It's like
that's fair.
Sometimes the players want an exact number, and it's like I don't have that. Hold on, there. You know what I mean?
Yeah. No, I gotcha.
Well, like I think for me, and again, I'm not, and like you brought up, JT, you do have to be careful about this to a point, right? But just to put it in D&D terms, I might ask them to make a roll, and I'm watching to see roughly what comes up on the die, and basically how far and on which side of 10 it is, kind of in my brain, is determining how effective they were. You know what I'm saying? Like if it comes up.
Steve plays D&D with success and failures.
Kind of, in a way, right?
Steve doesn't have target numbers. Steve has like success and failure numbers.
Well, but like, okay, we'll just say, but to me, this works kind of good in this kind of area where we're talking about where the player is good at something the character isn't, or vice versa, right? So you have them roll, and we'll say it comes up a 5. Well, so it or 15. Well, their intention got through.
Right.
They roll a 5, it didn't.
Right. Yeah, I know where you're coming from. I'm just picking on you because that's a mechanic from another game that you just shoehorned right into Dungeons and Dragons, which I love. I do it all the time. I'm not giving you too much hard time because I've done that so much recently and in the past that it's not even funny. It's just like target range, and then if you crit, we'll talk about something else.
Right, but you know what I'm saying? Like, in other words, like, okay, I'm not really looking for your total number with all your bonuses and whatever. You took a shot at this thing you really shouldn't have, but I don't want it to be as arbitrary as looking at someone and go high low.
The question that comes out of my mouth every time I do that is, what did you get on dice? What'd you roll on dice? Well, with my number, no, what'd you roll on dice? And they go, oh, okay, I rolled this. I'm like, all right. What's it with your modifiers? Mm-hmm. Oh, it's this. Okay, all right. That's a different story. Or if the dice number's high enough, I don't care what your modifiers are.
Right.
Because a dirty 20 is not a crit, but a natural 20 is, in my opinion, when it comes to skill checks. You're not even supposed to quote unquote crit on skill checks, but I mean, who's judging us?
You would not be the first person to have that opinion.
Right.
Definitely not. Yeah.
But yeah, that's why I'll be like, what'd you roll on dice? And they'll be like, oh, I got a 17. I'm like, the hand goes up, the wave comes out, you're good.
Well, I guess to a certain point, what I'm talking about too is a little bit like you said, like, be it success, how many successes in Genesis, or even, I think even more, it's a lot more like PBTA, right? Where you have, was it 7 and under is a failure, 7 to, or 8, 6, whatever the range is. I'm blanking on it at the moment, but I think it's
the 3 ranges of success and failure. It's
usually
this
it's
set
like
of numbers is
7
a success.
to 9, I think, and then 10 plus.
Yeah. But in a sense, that's almost how I'm viewing their D20 roll, which doesn't work as well because it's not a bell curve, and that's a whole different discussion for another day and blah, blah, blah. But
that's a conversation with somebody that's good at math, and that ain't me. That ain't me.
Hey, if we're talking dice probability distributions, just let me know the day and time. I'll come on. We'll record another one. I have thoughts for sure about that because I've actually written articles and things on the D20 Radio blog about bell curves and stuff like that. So
Well, if you do that, if you do want to come on and talk about that, that'll make you a unofficial honorary Steve. So
ooh.
Well, semi-unofficial, because it's
I don't
sort of
know. At this
official because
point,
we
I
said
think
it.
it's kind of official. I think it's kind of official because it's our podcast.
I mean, that's kind of what I mean, right? Like, but the thing is, there are really no benefits or penalties to being an honorary Steve. So,
As long
yeah.
as you like the name Steve, then
Yeah,
As
fair.
long as you like the name Steve, then you're good to go.
And we may call you Steve at
We
some
may.
point.
We may.
I
Ask
would be
Cooley.
honored.
Ask Cooley. He'll tell you. Yeah, mate, they called me Steve like 14 times. I'm sorry, Hooley. I had to do it.
I think the last time we had him on, we made him do the intro to the show.
I think we did. Oh, man.
Shout out to Hooley, love you, man. But
I'm so excited. He's coming to Gamer Nation Con, or planning to this year.
yeah, it was really missed him last time.
Yeah. Where were we?
Oh, I have no idea.
Talking RPGs. That's where we
Oh,
were.
yeah. Well, we went down a rabbit hole of dice probability and so forth.
Right.
Because of me and my nebulous see what they rolled on the die comments.
Yeah, honestly, as a GM, my style generally is sort of like, we're all having fun here. If, the players are having a good time, and if it's like, what they're doing is going to be fun for the game and the story, I'll generally be pretty liberal with like what I will allow, or, the way that I'll fudge things.
Mm-hmm.
As long as it's not like totally game breaking or unfair to like another player or something like that, I'm generally pretty good with that. So, in terms of like adjusting difficulties or whatever, yeah, I'm totally with you on that. I'm as long as it, seems to fit with what's going on, then that's fine.
I agree. I don't think there's a reason. If it doesn't fit, it doesn't fit. But I don't think
Right.
there's a reason to be super stiff about that.
So we're going down a tangent here, but it's our show, so it's okay. So just to go off what you're saying there, right? It needs to fit, and I'm in a sense contradicting some of my own arguments here. But are there times where you don't roll because you don't want the dice to say something that you actually don't want to happen?
Yeah, actually, all the time. Yeah, I definitely, as a GM, I like my story. That's like one of the main reasons why I play and run RPGs is I love sort of getting into the stories, and I love the fact that you can play games where every participant has a chance to contribute to the story and you get to shape it together. And a lot of times I end up thinking of the games that I play as sort of like a novel or a movie or something like that. And so I try to think like, if I were reading this in a book or if I were watching this, like what would be awesome to see or like what would I want to see happen? And as long as it doesn't feel like I'm railroading the players or I'm really doing something that they don't want, because I am very conscious usually, especially when I'm the GM of, like what the players want to happen versus what I would like to happen, sort of try to find the balance there. But I will say, like, oh, yeah, don't even bother rolling for this. I love that you said this or this argument. I think that totally makes sense. Go ahead and, you convince them or something like that. Or, like, oh, I wasn't even thinking about you, using your whip to swing across the chasm. That's awesome. I'm not even gonna have you roll for that. I think that just happens kind of thing,
Mm-hmm.
So for me, it's really just like in service of the story, and as long as it doesn't feel like I'm taking any of the drama or excitement out of the situation, then I will just go with it.
I think that kind of circles back to the thing I brought up, early on about how are you participating in the story, right? Are you first person view or third person view?
Or
Yeah.
are you the GM and you're 1,000-yard view?
Yeah, right. Yeah, I mean, yeah.
I have absolutely it coming towards the end of this last D&D campaign I ran, or the last first part, or the last of the first part of this D&D campaign I'm running. I was laughing out loud at the political ramifications of some of the things that they were doing, because as the GM, I'm sitting there going, "Oh no, they don't know. Oh, they don't know. You haven't figured it out yet."
Yeah, and it's weird because in a way we went off track of the player knowledge, character knowledge thing, but in a way we're all sort of still talking about how you deal with that split.
Yeah.
You know what I
Well,
mean?
we're doing the thing we do. We're giving
Right.
helpful tools to help and deal with that problem.
Mm-hmm.
And not to sound like a broken record again, but again, it really just goes back sort of to like, what is your group all about? And like as long as you have a good understanding sort of the sort of game you're trying to play, that will guide you in terms of things like, oh, well, do I just sort of, write it off and just let it happen, or are we playing the sort of game where players want there to be, dice are arbitrating, what happens or not, sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And as long as you and I'm talking, of course, as mostly from the perspective of the GM, just because I tend to GM most of my games, which is another story. But
Is that you sound like me? Much to my chagrin, I GM most of my games.
I mean, honestly, I love GMing and I
Yeah,
love the
no.
storytelling and world building and stuff. I do love getting a chance to play. So every once in a while, I'll have one of my players be like, "Hey, you want to run a one shot?" I'm happy to let you, take over for a session or whatever, and then we'll do something. But yeah.
Yeah, I absolutely took a month after this first part of the D&D campaign wrapped up and was like, "Okay, guys, no more D&D for right now. You run something for me, I'll run some more stuff for you, and we're gonna make this a more symbiotic relationship because I love GMing, but boy, do I like playing these games."
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Oh, but not to get too far off of where
Oh
I was
yeah,
going with things, though.
sorry.
No, it's fine. But yeah, so like from the GM perspective, then, as long as I can sort of find that happy medium where sort of like my interests and the player's interests overlap, and like I'll understand, like, okay, this player really likes to be challenged as a player. This player isn't very good at talking and like hates being put in the situation where they actually have to say what the character's saying, things like that. I just try to work that out and make sure that I am accommodating the group as best as I can.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I feel that, and trying to it's the luxuries of playing with a long-term group that comes with, and I've done my best to try and get to the bottom of asking people what type of player they are, how comfortable they are with role play, and what that means to them. I think that's the question that when I say the word role play, what does that mean to you? And that I get wildly different answers out of different people. And if they're comfortable with it, I want them to expound on it more. If they're not comfortable with role play, that's great. I understand exactly where you're coming from. I don't really need a ton more information out of you because I know what you're not comfortable with at that point, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
I'll ask, where's the line? What are you not, what are you apprehensive about? Okay, cool. I'm not going to make you cross that line. That's fine. Unless you want to.
I think too the answer to that question also gives you kind of an idea where their line about player knowledge versus character knowledge is, or where their perception of that line is, I guess. You know what I'm saying?
I agree, yeah.
Oh yeah, no, I'm with you too.
Like I think it is, and we've said it over and over again all night, but I think the biggest thing about player knowledge versus character knowledge is how does the table you're at want to handle that, and that's a group decision in a lot of ways, and I think with certain things like just for reference, right? You wouldn't want Grog from Critical Role's Campaign 1 designing some sort of very complicated mechanical contraption. You'd want
Or would
Percy
you?
to do that.
Or would you?
But at the same point, there were times in that campaign where Travis, as Grog, made some very impassioned speeches, and he was very good at doing it in a voice and in what seemed like thoughts that would come to Grog.
Yeah, I think that's again coming back to the what are you comfortable with? What's the
Right.
line?
Right.
How far into role play before you become and that's getting people out of their shell and breaking down, like, some of that is people are about people they don't know, and that's fine. And they're, we're all here to do the same thing, and I get it. It's scary. But getting people out of their shell, getting people used to talking to people that they don't know, and getting them to introduce their character in a way helps that. And I've played growing up and playing the games that I've played, I played with people who were socially awkward, socially, quiet. It's one of those things where I learned as an early GM that getting people out of their shell helps the entire table, and getting people comfortable with the table is a huge thing. And some people's comfortable is very different from other people's comfortable, and that's just how it is. And learning how to gauge somebody and be like, what are you cool with? What are you not cool with? How far into role play do you get? Or how far do you not get into role play? Do you just here for combat? Oh, that's cool. I run maybe a little bit more role play heavy game, so that might not be the best fit. But if you feel it isn't, you're welcome to express that, or I'll try to change how I game a little bit more to be more, accommodating towards that. I've been playing too much D&D because I've been thinking in D&D terms, but that's just how life has been recently. But yeah, I think getting people comfortable out of their shell and comfortable with the table is the first step into figuring out where that character knowledge and where that player knowledge line comes in.
Very well said. And yeah, we did sort of mention it offhand, but like sort of we've been alluding to things like safety tools, for example. In terms of making people feel comfortable and make sure that everyone knows that you're gaming in a safe environment and you're not going to force anyone to do anything they're not comfortable with, and making sure that that can change on the fly too. It can adapt to the individuals and groups' needs. And that goes both ways. Maybe someone started out really not feeling comfortable with certain topics or with, speaking as their character. But if they want to give it a try, or, they're feeling, more open to it, then definitely encourage them to, do that if that's something that they're interested in, So,
yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Make sure that you encourage them. Make sure that you're a positive voice when they want to role play. Mm-hmm. Because I played at a table one time where the GM was like, well, I didn't think you wanted to talk. I was like, dude, read the room. That is not the answer to that question. And I had to pull the GM aside and be like, hey man, no, not cool. Like, that's not okay.
Yeah.
And being able to call people out and don't, if somebody's going to do that, they're going to step out of their shell and put themselves in a position that they're not, that they're comfortable enough to be in that position, but it's a vulnerable spot for them. Mm-hmm. Be encouraging, be positive, hey, that was great. That was awesome. Whenever you want to do that more. And encouraging that is huge, 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 especially for, players with very social awkwardness, people that are shy, people that are, I've played with a lot of new players that are like, I don't know what I'm doing. It's like, well, okay, that's fine. Everybody starts somewhere. Like, you don't have to know everything. That's okay. And there's resources, whether you want to, you can be as involved in learning that as involved as you want to be. If you want to learn as you go, that's how I did it. I didn't listen to podcasts. There weren't podcasts when I started. Well, Steve, you were the same way. And I think JT, you probably were too. There weren't really podcasts when we started gaming. And so you had to learn these, tips and tricks and techniques and how to do things just by doing them, just by, oh, I did this one time. It worked really well. I'm going to carry that through going forward, mm-hmm. And that's just how it is. Sometimes that's just how the cookie crumbles, for lack of a better term.
Back in my day, we didn't have iTunes.
Back in my day, we didn't have the internet to play these dang old video games with. Yeah. No, but yeah, I don't mean to sound like an old curmudgeon, but that's just how it is. Sometimes you got to learn it the hard way.
You sounded like the old head.
Yeah. I'm the youngest person here, but I'm an old soul
no,
anyways.
I'm just giving you crap, dude.
Are you the youngest? I wasn't aware.
I'm freshly 30 as of the end of July.
Oh wow, yeah, then you
Yeah.
are the youngest. Wow.
But yeah, Steve knows I'm the weirdest 30-year-old.
Well, you self-described as an old soul, I think, early on in our friendship.
Yeah, I feel that. I feel like I am an old soul, especially how my knees feel most days. I woke up this morning and was like, oh, I sound like Rice Krispie treats.
Yeah,
It's
I'm
only
all
funny
too
because I'm
familiar with that. Yeah. And to your point about being a weird 30-year-old, I remember I actually used to have this T-shirt that I think was like a Felicia Day fundraising thing that I had supported, and it said "Embrace your weird," and I love that
Yes.
shirt. So
Yes.
I am all about that, and I fully support you in your weirdness.
Well, I think let's go ahead and get into final thoughts on this subject, and then we will move into the next part of the podcast.
Yes.
So basically, what I think that we've gotten from this is that there's only one right way to play.
Yeah,
The
yeah,
GM's wear the highway. Make sure to make all of your players role play no matter what. No,
Make
just
sure
kidding.
nobody is comfortable at the table.
Yeah, the goal is to make everyone as uncomfortable as possible. If they're not questioning having played with you in the first place, then you're not doing it right.
Oh man, if that means buying the worst folding chairs possible to put around your table and then you get the recliner.
Oof.
Oh man, that's a story. I played with a guy that was the situation. I felt bad. I ended up bringing my own camp chair because I was like, I have a comfy chair. If you don't mind, I can bring it. He's like, yeah, that's fine. He was like not used to having people at his apartment, so he didn't have chairs. He had a recliner, a table, and like one chair. And he'd gone out and bought the cheapest plastic chairs he could get. Now, this is not somebody that it's not like this guy didn't have the means to get nicer chairs. He just didn't have the want to get nicer chairs.
Oh,
and so we're all sitting there on these cheap, terrible plastic chairs. And I'm like, I am too big for this little chair. Like, hey, dude, you mind if I go to my car and get my camp chair? He's like, yeah, no, that's not a problem. Oh, man. I don't talk to that guy anymore, so I don't mind calling him out.
I think I can see why. But
yeah. No, but yeah, I agree. Make sure your players are as comfortable as they can be, and it's a symbiotic relationship. So your comfort, their comfort, it all goes back and forth. And if you can't accept that, that's too bad,
And yeah, there may be situations where player knowledge may be the way to go. And there are sometimes when character knowledge may be the way to go. I think we've sort of established that there's no one right answer for that in the end.
Much like much of this hobby, there is no one right answer.
Ain't that the truth? So I guess with that mostly being said, I know you do host when it has things primed by Cortex, but you had told us, off the air that you guys are kind of on a bit of a hiatus now just due to scheduling. Do you have anything else you want to plug or anything else? Just, while you're on here with us?
Oh man. Off the top of my head, nothing personally for me, but and I'm probably preaching to the choir here, but just check out all the awesome stuff we have on D20 Radio. We have so many awesome shows, many of which bring out new content way more than I and Kirby do. And also blog posts. I was a writer for the D20 Radio blog for a while too, and my posts are still on there if you want to go check that out. I guess if I want to give myself a little plug.
That was what I was going to ask. Is the blog back then? We have blog again?
Not really. I was actually sort of like on the staff for a while for the blog.
Oh, I mean,
writing,
okay.
But,
all right.
But I have been looking into blogging again, and I guess keep your eyes peeled. You might see a post or two from me at some point in the future.
Fair. Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, with that being said, let's go ahead and move into Game of the Week.
Woohoo! Game of the Week!
Woo!
Game of the Week! Game of the Week!
So you've been on before, but would you like me or Steve to go first, or would you like to go, JT?
I'll let you two go. I'm interested to see what you say. And
All right.
yeah.
I have one. If you want me to go first, or if
Yeah,
you want to
sure.
go first, it's up to you.
Yeah, go ahead.
All right. Are you two familiar with the idea of liminal space? Sort of an empty space that creeps the soul.
I think in the
of
abstract, but not
okay.
specifically.
So liminal space is, to my understanding, I could be, way off base with this, but every time I've seen a liminal space, it's usually like an empty abandoned mall that is perfectly mundane, however, just bizarre in how empty and open it is, right? It's a
Okay.
space that you can't quite explain the unease. So I have a game that runs off Powered by the Apocalypse called Liminalius. That is around the idea of liminal spaces. It's a horror game. I'm going to get it to you in the green room.
Okay.
That way you know where to be looking for that. It's a collaborative storytelling game inspired by Powered by the Apocalypse. It takes the players through a journey of eerie and unsettling location. It perfectly blends familiar, nostalgic, and disturbing elements to keep your players on edge. Expect a unique gaming experience that will challenge your imagination and creativity. And I have, not that I've been incredibly familiar with the liminal space stuff, but I've been curious to see how it could be included into role-playing games. And I'm very excited for $6. I'm getting my hands on this, right? Like,
Oh, I was actually about to ask, like, had you played it already? Because it looks like it just came out on drive-thru.
I did not play it yet. I'm gonna get my hands on it. I don't know when I'll get it on a table. Hopefully here in October, because spooky season is upon us.
I was gonna say it looks like a good Halloween type game. So
yeah, it looks like a good. The best way I could put this is it looks like a good horror game for people that aren't quite into horror gaming, right? Like people that
Nice.
aren't quite down for the full. I don't know how I feel about that whole spooky thing. I don't like being scared too much. Oh yeah, well let's play this game that's about spooky places. So yeah, that's the one I picked for this week.
Yeah,
Liminalius.
that looks interesting.
very
It
cool.
does, doesn't it?
Like conceptually, and that kind of place of unease is a thing I really like to do in horror games.
You do. I know you do. But okay, side tangent. Your place of unease is my place of like, oh, I'm at home. Because I played your Delta Green game that took everybody into the woods, and they're all like, how long to a phone? And I'm like, oh, sweet.
Oh,
The sweet release of silence.
well, right, but okay, just that game. I could tell, and this is someone the player specifically that I know I was getting to with that. I don't think I'd ever played with him before. And we
Oh,
were playing
okay.
only on Discord, and I could tell the fact that there was no cell service was like really
bothering
making
him.
him twitch.
Yeah. No, I was like, oh, this sounds like Uncle Merle's farm.
Mhm. Oh yeah, my parents' house.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, this seems like it's right in my wheelhouse.
Yeah. I thought it seemed like my wheelhouse, and I was like, you know what, this might overlap with Steve a little bit.
Oh, just a touch.
It's already in my cart, to be honest. So
okay. Moving on. Who's next?
You want me to go or you want to, JT?
I'll save mine for last, I think.
All right. Well, I'm going to go with a quick little game I found on drive-thru today. It's been on there for a little while now. It's a little game, all of 8 pages, so you can print it on both sides of all of 4 sheets of paper, and that's actually kind of one of their selling points. It's a game called Quantum Starfarer.
It is quite a name.
I'm intrigued.
Now, I will warn you, to get the PDF of this, it's going to cost you a whole $1.
Twist my arm, why don't you?
Oof, yeah, breaking the bank there.
Their description is starships riding fire across the sky, heroes and villains exchanging laser fire, desperate spacers struggle against an alien monstrosity, vast alien vistas, flying cities, moonscapes, mad robots, and first encounters. High action science fiction adventure that stimulates your sense of wonder. Now on 4 double-sided pages.
Yeah.
Says, quick character generation, personal vehicle, starship combat, starship design, procedural world generation, and a quick equipment guide. Now, how they crammed this all onto 8 pages, I don't know, but
Is this the game we play Space Smokey and the Bandit with?
it might be. I mean, we already did that in Retro Star once, but
Yeah,
that
well,
story is too much fun.
if we do Smokey and the Bandit 2 in this one, I got you. Or we do the scrapped Smokey and the Bandit 2, which is Smokey is the Bandit.
Ooh, there you go.
That was the scrap. That was supposedly that movie was shot and was so bad that they said, no, we're not releasing this.
Oh, wow.
Oof.
But it actually also, the PDF apparently comes as a 3-pack because they give it to you if you're not from the US and you use those metric paper sizes. It comes formatted in both A4 and US letter, as well as a laptop and tablet friendly A5 format. So all that for a mere $1. Or the print on demand options will cost you $4 plus shipping.
Oh, it's really nice.
I mean, hey, look, I it looks like it probably has, kind of going back to what we were talking about last week, some really good, like generation inspiration type tables and stuff. And for
Yeah.
$1,
Yeah, I can't argue with that.
I
mean,
love procedural world generation, so.
Oh, you should have been on last week then.
Well, I mean, if I had an invitation.
well, technically you brought this idea to me like a few hours before we were recording.
This is true. Yeah.
Last week. But yeah, that's mine, called Quantum Starfarer.
Definitely have to check that one out too. I'm starting to rethink this whole coming on the show thing because it feels
Yeah,
like every time I come on, I'm ending like spending a few bucks, at the end for the games of the week. And
I'll be completely honest, and this is the truth. I have been very budget conscious about my games of the week because I have spent too much money on this podcast.
Hey, you're coming from the guy who used Invisible Sun.
Yeah, no, I know. That's a game. That's like
my God.
$1,000 game at this point.
I was gonna say like 100 if I had remembered from the Kickstarter, but now you're probably right at this point.
Yeah, because there just keeps being more. And I'm not saying it's a bad thing. I never threw money. I never actually got to throw money at Invisible Sun. But yeah, I bring it up. And ever since then, I've been like, I got to be a little bit more budget conscious because that's outside of my means.
Well, I don't mind going off the rails with the budget for mine, but
I don't mind. The wife does. What you got, JT?
Yeah, so when you mentioned Dread earlier, actually, Steve, it reminded me of another game I had played, and actually the first time I played it was at Gamer Nation Con, not the last one, but GNC7, and it's called Icarus, and it's a storytelling game, and the tagline, a collaborative storytelling game about how great civilizations fall. And so the idea here is that you're actually using dice to build a tower, not Jenga tiles. So if you get the hard copy of the game, actually it comes with the dice, and they're sort of like flat-sided or rounded dice, which work pretty well for the stacking.
Played this. I
Oh,
played
have you?
this.
Okay, yeah, it's really cool.
Yeah.
But the idea is that you start out with a premise of a great civilization, and it can be like any type of thing you could think of. And they have some prompts for it. So they've got like a fantasy one, a cyberpunk one. They've got like something akin to Atlantis. But basically, whatever you're doing, Wild West, frontier, but you have this civilization. And each player ends up playing basically a single character, but that character is going to represent a different aspect of your civilization. And there are like sort of cards that get dealt randomly. So you find out what aspect the character you're creating is going to represent. So it might be like the economy or the energy or law and order, or things like that. And so you come up with a character premise based off of that. And what you end up doing is every round you're going around and everyone is talking about what their character is doing to affect some sort of change in the society. And I forgot to mention, actually, this would make more sense if I mentioned that every character also has like a particular motivation that is also sort of determined with cards. And so your motivation may be, to protect, the civilization's citizens, or there's actually one where you're trying to bring about the downfall of the civilization. You can also have, like to become, the leader of the civilization, whatever. There's just a bunch of stuff. But basically, everyone is creating changes to what's going on and like what their character's doing in pursuit of their motivations or to try to like fix problems, whatever. And you're rolling the dice in order to see whether or not you succeed. And depending on whether or not you succeed, you can either successfully make the change or something goes wrong and you make the situation worse. And in addition to that, if you fail your roll to make the change you want, then that die ends up getting stacked on top of this dice tower. And so as you're going along and people keep failing, you're stacking more and more dice on this tower. And as soon as that dice tower falls, that represents the end of the civilization. And you sort of wrap up the story. And based off of what was going on when it happens, you sort of come up with the story about how the civilization ended up finally falling.
Yeah, it's really freaking cool.
I don't think I'm doing it justice with my explanation.
No. You are. It's a hard game conceptually to explain, and you are just about right on the money with what's happening. I had a player come to me and be like, "I want to play this," and I was like, "Yeah." Because he had bought it and he's like, I wanted to try this, and I bought it and I read it and I'd like to run it. I'm like, go for it, because this sounds awesome. Yeah, that's a really cool game.
Yeah, and I definitely recommend it for people who like sort of that collaborative world building aspect. And
Well, he's just a little insight on that player. He's been on a collaborative world building kick. He got this whole, I don't remember the company. It's a whole bunch of like tabletop RPGs where they're like the size of like a note tablet, and they're really cool. But yeah, he was talking about that. It's super awesome.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun. And I actually, the first time I played it, I remember I was playing it incorrectly. And I was like, man, why is it taking so long for this tower to fall? And it's because I didn't realize that you had to add the dice that were failing to the dice tower and not just like, I think I was just like increasing it by one every turn. But it's supposed to go a lot faster because you're adding it whenever you fail a roll, basically. So
yeah, no, this looks really neat. I like the concept behind it for certain.
Yeah, and they even mention in the description for the game too, I think, that it can be used kind of like as a session zero tool as well. Like if you wanted to create a setting, and granted, the civilization falls by the end of the game, but if you want to go at any point in the history or like at the beginning of where you start with it, then you could then take those characters and the different events and incorporate that into a campaign that you play in. So I thought that was pretty cool too.
No, I mean, this would be great like that. Like, and even like, yeah, no, that would be really cool. And then like, so yeah, you do this and then you play a story within that city in something else leading up to that fall.
Yeah, and like when I've done it in the past, you end up creating just a whole bunch of other things incidentally in telling your story. So like I remember we did like an Atlantis type civilization in one game, and then we talked about all the different nations and how they were competing for resources and stuff. So then I'd been thinking about like, oh man, we have like the perfect setup here. Like if we wanted to have like these different nations, going at it in like a role playing campaign, it just got my brain turning. So.
Yeah, I love it. I love this age of taking this hobby and turning it on its head. Oh, so lovely.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
It really is.
But with all that being said, at the time that the folks are hearing this, you just missed PGX. Unfortunately, I'm not able to go, or was not able to attend, due to coming down with COVID the week of the con, because of course that's my life. But I'm sure, Steve, you'll have a great time this weekend, or we'll have had a great time this upcoming weekend in the forward past tense.
I anticipate having very much of a good time by the time you all hear me say this.
JT, we want to thank you so much for coming on and talking to us today.
Mm-hmm.
as always, you're welcome back anytime you have a topic you want to talk about. It sounds like maybe we'll be talking the probabilities of dice at some point.
Yeah, I'll try to make it a little bit more interesting than that sounds if we do something like that. But yeah, no,
I
that'd be
will
a lot of fun.
will do my best to understand what you're saying, because me and math are not friends.
I'll make it as math friendly as possible. How's that? Yeah.
Woohoo.
But yeah, no, thanks for letting me invite myself. I really appreciate it.
Thanks
You're
for letting
welcome.
me invite myself on your podcast. It's like when it's when you have a really close friend and they know they can just show up at your house. They know it's okay if they
Yeah,
just
raid
show
the
up.
fridge, you know, just sort of lounge around and
Hey, Matt's here. All right, cool. But as always, links to everything are in the show notes. Facebook, Discord, Patreon. Again, I'll remind everyone, if you're listening on Apple Music or Apple Podcasts, I should say, or any podcast app that lets you rate us, please give us a rating. If it's 5 stars, feel free to leave it. If it's 1 star, send us an email. It's down there as well. The fact of it is that if you like this podcast, leaving us a review helps the podcatchers promote us automatically, just sort of organically, to other people that like the same stuff. And we would love to, the bigger our audience is, the better our podcast is. And that's not saying that a small audience makes us a bad podcast. I'm just saying that we have a fantastic community over at the Discord that is always calling me out on anything. And we just have a lot of great conversations. If you come join the Discord, you might get the opportunity to play games with me. Who knows? I might be running something this Saturday just because I can't leave the house and I have a game prepped.
Ooh, don't threaten me with a good time.
Yeah, but as always, we want to remind everyone to be kind to one another and get out there and play some RPGs.
Yep. Take care, y'all.
See ya.
Intro and outro music by the band 12 Noon. You can email us at meandsteverpg@gmail.com. You can find us on Twitter and RPGs. Find us on Facebook at Me and Steve RPG Podcast. On Discord at Me and Steve RPGs. And as always, all of these links are in the show notes. Thank you, and be kind to one another.
How much for the cigar?
Cigar, $20, dog. You gotta go down the street to the store and buy that.
Well, yeah, that's the thing I forgot to mention to you about before.
Okay, well, we'll cut this intro and do it again. All right,
Yeah,
cool.
that's fine. We can fix it in post.
We can fix that in post. All right, so what happened?